Dan, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. How are you today?
We are great, thank you. Although we're talking about a 2-8 football team, you're obviously talking and calling games of an 8-1 football team. There are so many storylines. Jared Goff and the resurgence of him playing quarterback. Certainly, Dan Campbell and his post-game dances and handing the game balls out is so much fun to watch. And of course, just the Lions overall now being a team that's perennially in the playoffs. What would you say is the best aspect of this team?
I think it's just that they have turned the organization around and made it into one that is respected, that people are looking at when they rebuild their organizations and say, okay, what did Detroit do? How did they do it? Because they've built it on a strong foundation. It's built to last. It's built around a lot of young players that are still getting better. And that was really never the case in Detroit. You know, we had playoff teams here and there where Matthew Stafford might drag them up and down the field and Calvin Johnson would do some heroic things. But we really never had anything that looked like it had any sustainability. So to be seen now as a franchise that's doing things the right way and smart and handling their business and drafting well and developing well, I think that's the biggest thing, and that's what's led to success.
You can find him on X at Dan Miller Fox 2. He is the play-by-play for the Detroit Lions. Dan, I don't want to say we're not going to talk about this matchup during this interview, but something tells me we are going to spend more time over the next 10 minutes talking about what you just referenced as opposed to the Jaguars and the Lions actually coming up on Sunday. Let's talk a little bit more. What was it that the Lions did in this rebuild? Is it solely Dan Campbell? Is it solely Brad Holmes? How did they tear this thing down? What then became the next step, and why do we see them succeeding the way that they are 4 years later?
I'm glad you asked the question because I like to tell the story because it really is the reason that they are where they are. And it's neither of the people that you just mentioned. They're obviously part of it. But their owner, Sheila Hamp, in 2021, when she decided, or I guess it was 2020, when she decided to get rid of the previous regime, she could have gone out and just hired a head coach and hired a general manager, but she didn't do that. She let go of them during the season, and at that point, she did a deep dive into her organization. She talked to people from all corners of it and found out it wasn't a good place to work. That people were very unhappy. They did not feel valued. There was no collaboration. You were either made to feel like you're part of the football organization or you're not part of anything. So anybody in sales, community relations, public relations, media relations, anything else was made to feel like they didn't matter. And she knew that was a problem, that they couldn't be successful until they changed that. So she went about deciding what they wanted to be and the type of values and culture they wanted to have. And that's a word we use all the time. Most of the time we use it wrong. But when you know it, you see it, and you understand it, then you know it's being used right. And they have a culture. And she went out and hired Chris Spielman, who's an all-time great Lion and loved, revered here in Detroit. And they set about, deciding what a Lion looked like and what a Lion organization looked like and what it should be like for everybody coming to work every day in every single corner. And then she, Chris Spielman, their president, Rod Wood, their COO, Mike Disner, everybody they hired, including the head coach and the general manager, had to believe in those same core values because that's what was going to guide the franchise. And that's really how they built this thing. Then you can get into, okay, Brad Holmes is really good at his job and drafts good guys. And then Dan Campbell hired a terrific coaching staff and has, made changes along the way, but a coaching staff that knows how to develop players. Because if you're not doing both things, drafting and developing, you're just not going to succeed. Lions drafted players for years, but very rarely gave out second contracts because most of them fizzled out. Now they're paying out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions to guys that are coming up on second contracts because they want them here for the long term. So, you know what? It's deciding who you are, and then it's having a plan, sticking to the plan, being patient to the plan, and executing the plan. And I've seen plenty of bad plans here for 27 years that I've been in Detroit. And this is by far, not even close, the best that I've seen, and they're just doing it the right way. But it has to permeate your entire organization or it just won't work.
Dan, do you know the meme, Dear Lord, I see what you've done for others, and I want that done to me? That's all I could feel as you were describing that. I know Taylor has some questions for you, but I do want to just hit home the point you made about Spielman coming back, because that has been a hotly debated topic here in Jacksonville. Would Tony Boselli, the one Hall of Famer in the Jaguars' history, be interested in taking on that advising role? I think it's important for our audience to hear there's a differentiation between executive vice president and the role that Chris Spielman had for the Lions, correct?
Oh, no doubt. And look, I know Tony. I've worked with Tony. I love Tony. And Tony has the kind of values that I think Chris does, where he understands not just football, but the organization in the city. And I think that's extremely important for somebody to have if you're going to be in that role. So, look, there were all sorts of questions here about what Chris does. You know, what does Chris do? Is he going to get in the way? Is he going to, make the coaches angry? Is he going to, and it's been anything but that. He is, somebody used that word again, collaborative with the coaching staff, and he dips into kind of everything. And I just did an event with him last night where he told the story. He said, look, we're open enough here that I can go to anybody and say, hey, why don't you think about this? And then maybe Brad Holmes may come to me the next day and say, hey, Chris, back off, because we're going to do it this way. And Chris will say, you know what, I will. And then sometimes they'll say, you know what, Chris, you got a good point. So if you have that trust in your organization between people where it's not about them, it's about what's best for the team, and you're working for the team, then you're headed in the right direction.
Dan, Taylor Dahl here. I do want to talk a little bit more about that draft approach, because I think that it's something that it's hard to grasp, and certain organizations, I think, focus too much on certain things, whether it's a certain type of player, and we joke about arm length here and things like that. But I feel like the Lions have had this thing where they're just like, get the guy that you love, because even in years when people have questioned, when it came down to Penei Sewell, when it came to drafting a running back in the first, when it came to getting a tight end when you already had a tight end, the obvious one probably Aiden Hutchinson, not overthinking that one. But what has been the approach in this draft in these last 3-4 years that you feel like why it's worked so well?
Well, I think Brad Holmes is really good at his job, and all the things that you just talked about certainly go into it. They look at all those things and try to understand, how a guy fits what they want to do. Does the guy's style fit what they want to do? Does the guy's character fit the type of organization that they want to be? And look, they're not perfect. Sometimes, they've brought guys in that they didn't feel necessarily worked out, but their hit rate has been incredible. And I would say this. It's not just draft day. It has to be beyond that. And it has to be a coaching staff that understands that guys don't come into this league understanding what it is to be an NFL player. You have to teach them. And the best programs, organizations year to year, the ones that do it every year, Baltimore, Pittsburgh in particular, I think I look at, they know what a Steeler looks like. They know what a Raven looks like. And they stick to that. And then they know how to develop them. And they can let guys go in free agency because they know they got another guy coming up behind them. So it's a two-pronged thing. It's drafting and developing. And it is really, it's what you said, it's drafting the guy that's right for you. And, yeah, they got a lot of grief. People wondered if there were people on TV saying, does Brad Holmes know what he's doing when they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs? Well, you know what? He does.
Yeah.
And Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the most explosive players in this league. And he fit them perfectly. And Jack Campbell, another guy, a linebacker that maybe people thought you don't draft an off-ball linebacker in the first round. Well, he leads them in tackles. He was slow developing at times as a rookie, but this year he's just taken off, and he's been terrific. And it's just, again, it's not arrogance, and it's not, you're not going to hit all the time, but it is having conviction to do things your way and then sticking to it and not doing what we saw other regimes do here in Detroit, which was, well, that didn't work. Let's pivot and go this way, and then let's pivot and go this. They don't do that. They just have their way of doing it, and they're going to stick to it. And if it doesn't work, they're going to, it's not going to work, and they're going to get fired because it didn't work, but they did it their way, and that's the way it's going to happen.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator. Does he want to come down to Jacksonville?
You got to ask him. You know what? I think Ben is. I think he'll be asked again by a number of teams this offseason. I think it becomes pretty clear. And look, I don't know all of Ben's inner thinking. All I can tell you is this: He likes it here. His family's comfortable here. He has a lot of autonomy here. He has a great relationship with the quarterback here. And wherever he goes, he wants to make sure that it is set up that he can succeed, whether it's having a quarterback, an owner who knows what they're doing and doesn't meddle and get in the way. I think all those things play into it. And I think he only has to look at his head coach and realize, hey, I don't remember if there was 6, 7, 8 coaches that came in the cycle with Dan Campbell. There's 2 left, and it's him and Sirianni, and that's it. And you know what? If these coaches take the wrong jobs with the wrong organizations, they're not going to last very long. And I know that's not where Ben wants to be. He doesn't want to be a head coach just to be a head coach. He wants to be a head coach if he can be successful. And if that right offer doesn't come along, he's got a really good gig here where they pay him a lot of money. He's got a lot of good players, and I think he's very content. I still think one day he'd like to do it, but it's got to be the right situation.
A guy by the name of Urban Meyer was a part of that same hiring cycle, Dan. So, yeah. We
seemed like ages ago.
Very familiar.
And you know what? Hey, you know what? There were people that said, why weren't the Lions bold and go out and get Urban Meyer?
Mm-hmm.
And just so you don't know. And look, guys, I've been through so many hirings here in Detroit where people thought, hey, that's a good hire. That's a good hire. You know, Bob Quinn was one of the next up-and-coming GMs. Matt Patricia was one of the next up-and-coming head coaches. There was almost, riots in the streets because they thought they had lost him here to the New York Giants. But it didn't work out, and this is nothing personal against Matt Patricia. It's just you don't know. You don't know until they're actually in that job and you see how they conduct themselves, how do they do business, and how are they going to succeed at this level in the NFL. And it's, man, I've been through enough of them to know that if you think you know the day that they're introduced, you're wrong. You don't. It's what they do when they get on the job.
I do want to ask, because obviously as we're getting ready for this matchup this weekend, I think for the most part, we know what the Lions' run game can look like. We know the trenches are some of the best, even without Aiden Hutchinson out there, that defensive front and their offensive line. We know what Jared Goff can do. Even when throwing picks, he's able to rally late and bring this team back. I think some of maybe the questions are the secondary. Maybe people not as familiar with that, using 2 draft picks on Ennis Rakestraw and Taron Arnold this last year. But how is that secondary looking so far, and what can the Jags expect? Obviously, looking like Mac Jones will be starting this weekend.
Yeah, secondary is probably the most improved part of the team. They brought in Carlton Davis, a veteran corner who's been terrific, had 2 interceptions the other night. He's provided just some stability back there. Moving Brian Branch from nickel to safety has been just a incredible success. I think he's putting himself up there with the best safeties in the league. If you look at the numbers that people rate, he's right up there. Kirby Joseph is playing next to him, and he's been terrific, and they've been great together. 10 interceptions between them. Taron Arnold has looked like a rookie at times, but he's got a ton of talent, and I think he's going to be fine. But he's definitely endured some difficult times. And Meek Robertson is a veteran they picked up from the Raiders, and he's played the nickel for him, and he's been solid. And so I think the secondary – they were playing last year with practice squad guys and guys from deep in the depth chart, and they had so many injuries. They revamped that whole thing, and it's been terrific. But the key is going to be, can they get a pass rush? And they got a decent one the other night, but that has to be a staple here. Zadarius Smith is going to play. Josh Paschal was back for the first time in a couple of weeks last week, and he looked terrific. Aleem McNeil's having a Pro Bowl year at defensive tackle. DJ Reader has been really good as well. So it's can they get enough pressure to allow those guys in the secondary to make plays? Because I don't care who's back there. You can have Revis Island all the way around, but if you don't put some pressure on the quarterback, guys in this league are going to beat you. So that's my outstanding question with this team is, without Aiden, can they get consistent pressure on the passer? Because as these games get tougher, and every game's tough in this league, including this Sunday. Nobody thinks they're just going to walk out there and win. You got to find some way to impact the passer, and that's what I'm keeping my eye on the rest of the way.
Hey, Dan, one more before we let you go on the Garber Auto Mall hotline. Dan Miller, the play-by-play voice for the Detroit Lions, joining us here on Helmets and Heels. This is off of our text line designed by Lifetime Enclosures. One of our listeners is wondering, did you think when Jared Goff was traded from the Los Angeles Rams and Matthew Stafford was dealt away, that Goff would be the quarterback of the future in Detroit?
No, I didn't. I certainly was a little bit surprised. I had a question as to whether or not, and I believe that night there was a conference call with Brad Holmes, and I asked the first question. It was, is he your quarterback of the future? And I think Holmes gave me a complete non-answer, which you would expect him to do, and I love Brad, and that's what general managers do. But two people in the building believed that he was from day one, and that's Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew, the general manager and the assistant general manager, both of whom were with the Rams when they drafted him. And they truly believed that if you surrounded him with the right personnel, that he could be your starting quarterback. And that's exactly what they've gone out doing. They've given him one of the best offensive lines in football, explosive running backs, one of the top receivers in the league in Amon-Ra, an explosive one in Jameson, a terrific tight end in Laporta, and on down the line. So there was belief within the organization that they could do that with him. And I think Dan Campbell bought in as well. And they endured some tough times early because it was ugly. But their faith has been borne out. But a long way of answering your question and a short way to say it is there weren't many people, if any, outside of this building that I'm looking at right now as I sit in the parking lot, that thought that he was going to be the long-term answer at quarterback. But clearly he has been everything they could have hoped for and more.
Hey, Mia here, and thanks so much for watching 1010XL Jaguars. For even more coverage of the Big Cats, be sure to subscribe to 1010XL Jaguars.